Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Marika Wall at the Globe and Mail, and I'll be your moderator for this press conference today. In the room in Ottawa, we have Minister Marc Miller, and then we have several guests virtually joining us as well that Minister Miller will introduce. We're looking at about 30 minutes for opening remarks and then 30 minutes for questions that will be equally divided between the room and the phone lines. And with that, I will turn it over to Minister Miller. Thank you.
Kwekwe, ulukut, tanse, hello et bonjour. I'd like to acknowledge first that I'm speaking to you here in Ottawa from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and would like to begin by welcoming online Elder Manitok Thompson, who will deliver an opening prayer.
Thank you and good morning, Honorable Minister of Canada. I'm honored to be here to say the prayer to bless you in your work and in the work of the federal government staff. I'm Manitok Thompson. I went to school without knowing a word of English. I learned English in school, like a lot of my colleagues, my age group. One of the big changes the school did to us was they took our names away and we were given English names. But I remember fighting for my name, Manitok, because I'm named after my aunt. And the teacher wrote it down, and I'm thankful today that I have my name, Manitok. My siblings and my classmates all had their Inuit names outside the building of the school, and as soon as we went inside the school, we became English. Everything was like everything was taken out, and we've never been yelled at before and by our parents coming into the school. It was very loud. We've never had an adult yelling at us. Our parents did not choose our English names. The priest did. Of course, nobody knew how to speak English. So the priest gave names to all the children that were born when they came into our communities. My sister Mona, my younger sister Mona, her Inuit name is Ningyo. They gave her Mona after Mona Lisa, the painting. And my older sister Leonie was Napak. My other sister Rosemary is Angugasak. My brother Anautalik became Louis. I'm very glad about this press release you're doing today. What a blessing. What a blessing you are to us, Minister, Honorable Minister. You're one of my favorite ministers in Parliament. I'm going to pray and bless your press release. It's a historic moment. All those kids that were buried had their own names. That meant something when they went into the school. They became Peter, John, Mary, Joseph, Andrew. Those were not their names. We all had our own names that were very, it's a complex social value. I have my name, Manitok, and I'm the holder of my aunt's family tree. Names like Elizabeth, Mary, and Joseph, and Peter don't mean anything to us. My wish is that the students that went to the Catholic schools, they would also dig out their original names that were given to them by their grandparents or the elders of the communities. I'm just going to pray now. I'm going to pray for you and your staff. We're very blessed today to have this press release. I'm glad I'm part of it. I read that this will be a very good beginning. This is not our light source. It's not a ceremonial thing. We use it because we're remembering where we come from as survivors. We don't have any trees, so our people invented this. This is our stove. This is a very small one that the men would take on their hunting trips. The big ones are about 1 meter long. Let's just pray. Oh Lord, I just come before you. I come before you with the minister, that his press release will be a blessing to all the organizations and to the people. I bless him and his family. I bless his office. I bless his staff that are working on this file. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. And I'm done.
Thank you, Elder Manitok, and thank you for joining us here today and your very kind words. I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, Garnet Angeconeb, a First Nations survivor of the Pelican Residential School.
Miigwech, kisem nito denan kuma. Miigwech kitenem kinamaga kubishkokan kayayan. Good morning, Mr. Minister. Good morning, everyone. I acknowledge each and every one of you. I thank the elder for her opening prayer and her greetings. I speak to you today from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people of Wishkokong, Lac Seul, which is near Seoul Lookout in northwestern Ontario. It's a real pleasure and a real honor for me to participate in this press conference, in this announcement, because to me, as a survivor, we have to acknowledge our shared history, where we've come from, where we're at today, and where is it that we're going to go into the future. That is so very important as we move forward together, based on truth, based on telling and speaking our truth. And so that this is very important, and that the records that will be handed over will be a way to get at the truth, to be able to tell our stories, to be able to validate and acknowledge where we have come from as survivors, as a country. Because today I often hear people talk about our collective and our shared history. And I think through this gesture today, we are on the road to sharing and acknowledging our shared history. And so in a way, I thank you for sharing those records, not just for survivors, not just for the Indigenous community, but also all of Canada. Because really, this is about Canadians talking to Canadians and acknowledging and validating our shared history. We've come a long way in the last 30 years or so in terms of significant milestones, significant measures to correct the wrongs of the past. And we need to keep going. There is so much work left to do. And, you know, we have had some very significant milestones starting in 1998, for example. For me, acknowledging the words of then Minister Jane Stewart in the Statement of Reconciliation. And then we move forward to the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement and all the elements within that. And we know that there is still a lot of work to do to reach resolution, to reach meaningful resolution through the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. I need not mention all the work that is yet to be done in the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And today, as we enter into yet another gesture, as we enter into another agreement to share information that is yet so important, that as we move forward, that we seek meaningful resolution for all. And so I'm really honored. I am really honored to be witnessing and also to be partaking in this announcement today. It's so meaningful, especially for us survivors in the communities. Too often, these dialogues happen in boardrooms. But when you come to the community and listen to what the survivors are saying on the ground, it is so important. And we need to continue to do that dialogue. Sometimes we need to listen to survivors on the ground to hear what it is that they want, what it is that they seek in terms of meaningful resolution. And so today, this is about chartering a course based on speaking our truth, telling our truth as we move forward. And I acknowledge each and every one of you for this important work that lies ahead of us. Miigwech, Kijamanaton Dana, Miigwech Kakinagabazindawiyek, and I thank you for allowing me to share a few words with you today. Miigwech, Miigwech, Miigwech.
Miigwech Garnet, your words remind us why this work is so critical and why we need to continue building trust and strengthening our relationship with Indigenous peoples on the ground, as you said, by taking appropriate steps like these to support foremost survivors, families, and communities in your efforts to heal, to achieve closure and accountability. Next, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Scott, Executive Director of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, who is joining us today virtually from Winnipeg. Stephanie?
Bonjour, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to acknowledge that I'm currently speaking from the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. It is also home to many Inuit as well. And I would also like to say a big miigwech to Garnet and the elder for joining us this morning and wishing us well with your prayers. I know others are watching us from traditional territories of Indigenous nations from coast to coast to coast. The NCTR currently holds almost 7,000 survivor statements and over 5 million records. However, we know this is still not a complete picture and records remain missing. This means that important truths of the experience of residential school survivors and actions of the Canadian government remain untold. The new memorandum of agreement between Canada and the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation will see the transfer of more records of residential school survivors to the centre. This is an important step on the journey of reconciliation. It is a step that is frankly long overdue. Nonetheless, I want to acknowledge Minister Miller and his staff for the commitment that they have made. These records include TIF documents, school narratives, and legible versions of documents that have been corrupted through the electronic conversion, updated versions of documents already obtained, and new narratives of residential schools that we have not received to date. I want to assure survivors and that the NCTR promises to be good caretakers of these records and to ensure appropriate security measures are in place to protect the integrity, authenticity, and sensitivity of these records. I want to thank the Government of Canada for answering the call to share the truths of survivors. It has been long overdue. Sharing access to the records of residential school survivors is imperative in achieving reconciliation. It is a necessary part of addressing historical wrongs. We must understand the shameful parts of Canada's past in the spirit of reconciliation. Today marks an important moment in our quest to find all the records. I pledge to survivors that the NCTR will continue to work with the Government of Canada and any other parties who hold records of residential school survivors. The information from these records will help in all stages of truth, reconciliation, and healing. It will help the NCTR and many others in educational efforts to understand the legacy of the residential school system. We're doing this work for the survivors, their children, their families, and communities. This includes the missing ones and their families who are still trying to locate their loved ones to this very day. I believe the missing children who were found this summer have guided us through this process and helped to move it forward to this announcement today. To all Canadians, I hope that this moment will serve to give you inspiration to commit yourself to being part of the process of reconciliation. On behalf of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, I want to express my optimism for the collaboration with the federal government we will undertake as part of this agreement. We look forward to sharing the information we find with the survivors, their families, communities, and all Canadians in the months and years ahead. Miigwech, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Stephanie. Survivors, families, and Indigenous communities have been clear from the start. Truth must come before reconciliation. It's taken too long to fully grasp the painful truth about residential schools and the racist and colonial policies that have denied Indigenous people their rights, their realities, their families, and their cultures. Last year was a turning point for all Canadians. The identification of unmarked graves at former residential school sites across the country was tangible and painful evidence of the abuse that Indigenous children have suffered at residential schools. Canada has a moral obligation to survivors to pursue the truth and to ensure access to documents, school narratives, and records so important to healing, to closure, to education and preservation. As part of this obligation and the broader objective of reconciliation, on December 10th, I committed that my department would hand over a series of residential school documents in their possession to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation within 30 to 45 days. Today, we follow through on that promise. The Government of Canada, the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation have developed a memorandum of understanding and agreement that covers the sharing of documents related to the history and administration of residential schools across Canada. The agreement was needed to ensure that documents can be shared safely and securely to protect the privacy of survivors and in a way that responds to the needs of the Centre. We have common goals in providing survivors with documents they may need for healing, as well as access for knowledge keepers, historians, and those studying and ensuring archival preservations. Families need this information. They want to know with certainty the relevant records have been released, and they have a right to that information. They have a right to know where their loved ones were taken. Nous travaillons donc en étroite collaboration avec le CNVR afin de dresser une liste des documents prioritaires et des délais de partage. Cela commencera par le transfert des récits scolaires qui n'avaient pas jusqu'ici encore été partagés, ainsi que le partage de documents dont le format a été corrompu par la technologie. L'accord décrit également les prochaines étapes qui comprennent la transmission de documents convertis dans un format plus lisible, les fichiers de remplacement des documents corrompus et les documents supplémentaires que la CNVR a identifiés comme étant cruciaux à leur travail. Nous travaillerons donc en étroite collaboration avec le Centre sur les délais de transmission et de ces documents également. Il s'agit d'une nouvelle collaboration avec le CNVR et le Canada, une collaboration fondée sur la transparence et, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, la collaboration. Et notre travail n'est pas encore terminé. We've also committed to an extensive internal review of all documents held by my department to identify other possible records we can share while respecting the crucial privacy obligations to survivors as well as other legal processes. Out of an abundance of caution, I will be issuing a directive to my department to retain any and all documents relating to these types of records. To Garnet, to all survivors, we want you and your families and communities to trust that we're doing everything in our power to uncover the full truth about what happened. We know that our words are not enough and that concrete actions are needed. Moving forward, our government is continuing to work with the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. They're doing painstaking, often heartbreaking work that's incredibly important to bring light to the truth about the ongoing legacy and current impacts of residential schools. I am reassured by the fact that we're not taking these steps alone. Other organizations, like the Sisters of St. Anne, have recently committed to work in partnership with the Center to review and release additional records in their possession. Together, we're taking accountability for the role that we played in the residential school system and for Canada's failure in protecting the rights of Indigenous peoples. Our government's commitment is strong and our relationships are strengthened only when we collectively pursue the truth. This is a first step in an ongoing process to bring answers and closures to those who need it most, and it's part of our collective commitment to reconcile Canada for a better and stronger future. On that note, we'll take a moment for Stephanie to sign the actual agreement with us before we proceed to the media round. I don't know if there's a camera on Stephanie, but... Stephanie, you need to speak to engage the camera so we can both...
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh,
So we can, yeah, and so we
I
can...
just
there you
signed
go.
it.
I have to,
There it is.
hang on, I have to sign.
Miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you. We'll proceed to media. Miigwech, thank you everyone for, we now conclude the formal part of this presentation. Thanks everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Minister. We will start with questions in the room, starting with Louis Blouin from Radio-Canada and then going to Erica Ibrahim with the Canadian Press.
Bonjour, M. Miller. Aidez-moi à comprendre concrètement ce que ça change peut-être d'un jour à l'autre, là, c'est ce qui est annoncé aujourd'hui. On parle de combien de documents qui n'étaient pas accessibles, qui le sont maintenant, de quelle nature, et puis à terme, on s'attend à quelle ampleur là, dans le partage de documents? Est-ce que c'est une grande part de documents par rapport à ce qui avait déjà été dévoilé de la part du gouvernement canadien?
Bien, on parle aujourd'hui concrètement d'un processus qui va systématiser de un, la collaboration, la relation renouvelée qu'on va avoir avec le centre, notamment dans le partage des documents. Je parle entre autres de 11 récits scolaires. Ça peut vous sembler très peu, mais c'est des milliers de documents. Un récit scolaire, c'est non seulement, ça dépend évidemment de l'école et des documents qui ont été préservés, mais on parle de milliers de documents. Ça peut être des plans du document, du site en tant que tel. Ça peut être les personnes qui ont participé à travers les années. Ça dépend du temps d'opération de l'école en tant que tel. Mais ça peut être beaucoup de documents, puis le niveau d'information, puis de confidentialité en ce qui a trait au contenu de l'information peut varier. Donc, la conclusion d'une entente avec le centre, c'est une certaine partie de par le fait, et le partage qu'on peut s'assurer entre nous pour garder la confidentialité pour les survivants et ceux qui vont y avoir accès. Donc, une systématisation de la relation qui prévoit, entre autres, le partage futur de documents. Je vous parle de 11 récits. C'est des milliers de documents, des documents qui sont convertis dans un format qui est plus lisible. Il y avait des revendications par le passé quant à la qualité, puis des documents corrompus qui étaient partagés, ça n'a pas été réglé. Et dans ce cas-là, on parle de documents corrigés au-delà de 800 000 documents. Donc, c'est beaucoup. Ça prend un format qui est sécurisé pour pas qu'il y ait du hacking, ainsi que les assurances entre les parties en ce qui a trait à la relation à venir. Donc, concrètement, aujourd'hui, le partage de documents des 11 récits se fera soit aujourd'hui, soit demain. Et puis, ensuite, le partage de documents qui ont été corrompus. Puis, c'était une revendication du centre qu'on remplit aujourd'hui.
Quelles sont les organisations religieuses qui résistent toujours à partager leurs documents et qu'est-ce que vous pouvez faire?
Bien, il y a toujours, de un, l'Organisation des Sœurs de Sainte-Anne, récemment, évidemment, ont été très ouverts à collaborer davantage. Ils ont peut-être je ne sais pas quel document ils ou elles ont. Donc, ils ont exprimé une ouverture. Il y a certaines organisations qui n'existent plus, qui, évidemment, j'en passe, mais l'Église catholique a toujours prétendu être décentralisation de façon effective, légale, mais dans le cas d'organisations qui n'existent plus, qui ont arrêté de fonctionner, un problème effectif, on ne sait pas où se situent ces documents, qui a l'autorité d'agir en ce temps-là. Donc, j'hésite à nommer les organisations spécifiques, mais il en reste qui résistent encore. On a vu récemment, suite à l'ouverture du Conseil des évêques, une plus grande ouverture de ces organisations en tant que telles. On s'attend à plus, évidemment, mais récemment, j'ai bon espoir. Yeah, sure. I mean, today we're talking about effectively 11 school narratives. A school narrative may seem like a very simple thing. It isn't. It can be school enrollment and names. It can have various levels of information. The Kamloops one is rather extensive. I wouldn't pretend it to be complete, but that is one of the ones being transferred today. It has plans at times of the site. It can have etchings. It can have various levels of confidential information. We're talking about thousands of documents in the case of documents that Stephanie referred to, and the very legitimate concern they had over the readability of certain documents. We will be transferring them over in a format that is readable. In the case of the latter, that is about 875,000 documents that will be now available, I understand, in a more readable format. And obviously, when you have a more readable format, there's opportunities for survivors to access that in a way that is more cohesive and complete, obviously to achieve closure and some more information as to the experience of their loved ones and their own personal experience. So Louis, your colleague, asked today about what the document itself would do. It is a systemized form and agreement between us and the National Center for Reconciliation as to the ongoing sharing of documents, the enhanced relationship we will now have ongoing, assurances with respect to the privacy. The National Center is a third party, and the assurances that we both need from each other to ensure that survivors, that we respect the privacy of information that is not necessarily ours, but really survivors, and the role and the key role that the center will play in ensuring that that survivors get access to that documentation and that they are a proper repository for an evidence base for what has happened throughout the last century.
Okay, we'll go to the Canadian Press next.
Hi there, Erica Ibrahim. How many documents have been transferred so far, and what timeline did you give your department to do this review?
So essentially, that's two questions. And as I mentioned to your colleague, there are 11 school narratives that hadn't up to now been transferred. The amount of document, I could get you information on what had been transferred as a result, and perhaps Stephanie has that information as a result of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission transfer of documents relating to that process. We are talking about two sets of transfers, one related to those school narratives, so thousands of documents. Those documents that we had in our possession that had third-party consent rights related to religious orders will be transferred either today or tomorrow. We have all the technology of it. There was an issue about technology and systematizing it. in order to have an effective transfer in a readable format, as well as the next step, which was very important and was an ongoing request from the center, which was to ensure the documents that have been corrupted, they had a new format that is more readable. And in that case, we're talking about thousands and thousands of documents, upwards of 800,000. The timeline will be ongoing as we discuss our own capacity to do so, but in relatively short period of time. I'd turn to Stephanie after I answer the next question with respect to the review of the department. There are various categories of review that we need to do. As I mentioned in my speech, out of an abundance of caution, I'll be instructing my department to retain all documents related to this process and to review our document retention procedures. We've had experiences in the past with decades ago, but ongoing in the course of ordinary course document retention policies where documents do get destroyed. That should not happen. So out of an abundance of caution, I'll be issuing that order. There is a process afterwards which will engage the Minister of Justice and his team to review the way in which we preserve documents and assert legal rights, albeit legitimate, are ones that we do not have to apply as broadly as we do. We've certainly seen misapplications of them in the case of St. Anne's residential schools, and those are situations that we would seek to avoid. And also, as we focus on survivors, we look at our moral obligations in that context. So that'll be an ongoing fluid discussion internally, and one that I'm very eager to see go forward. Stephanie perhaps could complete my thoughts on the transfer.
We do hold records that were transferred from the Government of Canada, millions of records. And we are looking forward to the new record set of the 11 narratives that we currently do not hold. The transfer is supposed to be beginning as soon as the MOA was signed. So we look forward to that happening within very quickly up to the next 6 months. We've set a deadline. So again, we're looking forward to seeing everything that holds. And I'm told there's over 850,000 document attachments to these schools, new documents that are able to be read. As the archivist and researchers were going through documents, sometimes you would get a letter that is often handwritten that you couldn't read. So we'll have a digital format that is easily accessible for the eyes, and as we review them, we'll be able to post them online and share the information with survivors, their families, and communities.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll go to Fraser Needham with APTN and then Olivia Stefanovich with CBC.
Okay, thank you. So just back to the government's view to want to fully disclose these documents as much as it can, but in terms of, you're saying, privacy and confidentiality, also respecting that of survivors. Will you ensure, or your government ensure, that where it is possible to protect that privacy of the survivors, where, there's ways to do that, right? Redacting names, things like that, that it will release all documents absolutely that it can, in terms of if they're able to respect that privacy and do so?
Yes, and the inevitable question that you would perhaps pose as a follow-up is, how are you sure that we're actually going to do it? And so I think the relationship that we're building today with the NCTR, and I open the door to other groups as well, and advocacy groups that have been so fierce in the defense of survivors and those suffering from intergenerational trauma, is to hold us to account. So today, the MOU is about the effective transfer of documents, but it's also about transparency, accountability, collaboration, and closure. And what we've seen over the last 5-6 months has shifted us away from a position of standing on our legal rights, which are rights, to our moral obligation, which is to get those documents out to the extent possible. This is not our information. This is not Canada's to hold and be the ultimate arbiter of, yet we are doing that and have done that. And that's not fair, it's not right. And what it does is it continues to open up a number of wounds that people thought were closed, and it isn't fair. So this is a step. It isn't the ultimate one, and we're constantly reviewing. I'm new in this position. Prime Minister has asked me to leave no stone unturned, and that is my intention to do so. There will be a lot of difficult conversations within our department, for sure, and with colleagues around the table. But I think as we move towards looking from that lens of our strict legal obligation to that of our moral obligations towards survivors, we'll see a lot of information going out. And frankly, if that gives an element of closure to one person that's been looking for a piece of information about their child or their relative for years, that I think is, in addition to the true narrative of what Canada is, it is important for those people that are still searching for it and have been doing so for some time. And there are specific examples of that reality.
Yeah, actually, my follow-up question is, based on sort of what you were saying before Christmas of, third parties being, for example, the Catholic Church, right? That your office is perhaps struggling on how broad you apply some of these rules that you're under as a government. Do you anticipate serious legal action from the Catholic Church and some lengthy court battles coming up here as your government goes down this road?
Look, I obviously never exclude it, but I think that's a risk that Canada needs to take and not ask survivors to bear. I don't know how to say it any more clear.
Okay, we'll go to CBC.
Morning. As a follow-up to that, Minister Miller, how did you convince Justice Canada to transfer these records without the sign-off of the respected Catholic entities? And what's stopping you from releasing all residential school records now?
So you asked some very broad questions, Olivia. First and foremost, I think it's important to remind folks that to the extent that Crown-Indigenous relations is the custodian of the documents, we are the client of Lawyers of Justice Canada. So ultimately, it is the decision of the minister to do so, and that's the decision that we took. We obviously need that review, and we need legal counsel to guide us in the best way. And obviously, those issues certainly can be taken up with the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, but he believes in this. I don't want to speak for him, but he does believe in this, and this is work that he has undertaken to do within the oaths that he swore. So I'll accompany him in this, and ultimately, at the end of the day, all things being equal, the decision is mine. And what was your second question? Sorry, you kind of double-barreled it.
Why can't you release all the documents now?
Well, it depends what you mean by quote-unquote all the documents. There is the AIP process with individual narratives that we've spoken about at length that the Supreme Court has said in many instances are subject to absolute confidentiality. So you'd need the waiver of the survivor in question to have that document accessible. The NCTR, I think people are painfully aware of that. There is an issue in around preserving those documents, and a whole discussion around the ultimate destruction of those documents that the Supreme Court has ordered us to do, because the AIP process, as you well know, was done in a very specific context of legal action where people were disclosing information for the purposes, very painful at times, and those that filled out forms and accompanied survivors in their testimony had to relive experiences for days on end in order to get what is very, very probably unsatisfactory compensation for the pain they suffered. But all that information is there. It's not up to Canada has a duty, as the Supreme Court has instructed us to do so, to preserve those documents. So those will not be released. There is a way and form in which information that Canada holds in order for, and then we're talking about a whole series of documentation, but there is information that Canada holds that can disclose to survivors in the context that they are needing to get compensation, and we've seen that in the various review of claims that have been made and heightened compensation that has been awarded, and that's a process that Canada can do better at. But again, these are all fluid discussions with respect to broad categories of documents that do follow under various legal headings that Canada has invoked, and I'll admit it freely too often, various privileges that it has with respect to its legal right to preserve documents, not allowing the ability to search through documents as opposed to just providing them. And I think that in my mind is something that is silly, because it impedes an ability of a survivor to get information. And while it is our strict legal right to do so, it's something that at times we can waive. But when there are these third-party interests, most notably the rights of survivors to have absolute confidentiality over the experience that they disclose in the AIP process, that's something that we have to take very seriously.
Okay, we have to go to the telephone lines now. So operator, over to you.
Thank you. Merci. Our first question, la première question, is from Christy Kirkup from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. À vous la parole.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for taking our questions. And I just wanted to acknowledge off the top to say hello to Garnet. It's been a while since I've spoken to you, but I wanted to recognize your courage in speaking at today's news conference. My question is for Stephanie Scott. I'm wondering if you could please speak to the level of resources available at the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation to receive these additional documents, and I'm wondering if you will be seeking additional funding to manage the influx of records.
Yes, absolutely. The Liberal Platform Party had made a commitment to provide sustainable funding to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, as well as the construction of an NCTR building. We have an archive staff, and we've been in negotiations with Minister Miller's department on providing that funding, because the influx of records and community need and the communities that have reached out to us is absolutely imperative that we are staffed appropriately in order to meet that demand and to move the records out so into the survivors' hand and communities that are currently looking for their children. So we've had those discussions. I'm hoping that when the budget is announced that, we'll be in it and that we'll have some very good and wonderful information coming to us for our work on behalf of survivors, their families, and nations.
And just as a follow-up, I'm wondering, Minister Miller, if you could please speak to the fact we know that the NCTR is still, it has said it's still awaiting final versions of school narratives and supporting documents used in the independent assessment process. And I know that you've been clear that, of course, absolute confidentiality applies to documents related to the IAP because of the Supreme Court decision, and you have previously said you're going to work with cabinet colleagues on a way forward for third parties to access this information. So I'm wondering if you could just please provide an update as to where this is at.
Yeah, and thanks. And just to piggyback on the answer that Stephanie gave, we did make that commitment, including a new building as part of the last election campaign. It's one we intend to follow through on, and we know that the resources at the NCTR are well and sufficient, as well as the building in which it's housed. So I just wanted to reiterate that support. The work that we are doing with respect to the sharing of information, as I mentioned to some of your colleagues, there is a big swath of information that will be shared today, as well as the in addition to the provision of review of documents that are in a more readable format and a more secure format. So that is a big step forward today. We do have a number of processes internally that that are getting going as we look at the full universe of documents that are out there. I think it would be safe to say that work is in its infancy, but it is one that we have good collaboration with our teams at Justice, as well as internally at my department, and I would note Minister Haidu's department. Getting a sense on the universe of records that is out there is a very important first step. Getting a second step, understanding of what the legal obligations are out there. There are the more poignant examples that you just cited, Christy, that we have to look at in a very clear and sober way, including the preservation of those documents ultimately in the face of a Supreme Court judgment that asks us to destroy them, which I find personally unacceptable. Yet it is a decision of the Supreme Court. Those are issues that we will struggle with over the coming months.
Operator, next question.
Thank you, merci. Our next question, la prochaine question, is from Annie Bergeron-Olivier from CTV National News. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. À vous la parole.
Hi there. Thank you very much for taking our questions today. My first one is for Minister Miller. I'm just wondering if you can talk about some of the work that went into trying to figure out which documents were available. And I know that there had been some challenges getting documents that were in provincial possession. Are any of these being released documents that had been in the possession of the provincial and/or territorial governments?
Yeah, and look, I won't share the frustration I've had over the last couple of months in trying to get a sense of where things are at. That will remain internal, but it is one. I think we have the eager participation of my department, of our teams at Indigenous Services Canada, at Justice Canada, and the keen focus, frankly, of the Prime Minister in making sure that we are putting our best foot forward in terms of transparency, accountability, and collaboration over the work and sort of the eye-opening events that have happened over the last 6 months have asked us to shift our focus, and it's a point that's been clearly made within government, and we're all keeping a keen eye on that. I think you hit on a very important point, which is the documents that are being held in provinces. I have noted recently the work that has been done in British Columbia, in Ontario, in offering those documents. That is work that will continue in parallel with the work that we're doing with provinces in supporting the searches in and around schools, and the next steps that we need to take. Over the last couple months, I think there have been, or either in process, about 40 funding announcements to support searches or mental health supports for survivors for residential schools, in terms of communities that have decided to take that step forward and search former sites. But there is a lot left to be done there, including the next step, which is collating and getting all that information and moving towards the next step towards accountability. And I think those provincial records are ones that are very, very important. I have not heard from any province any reluctance to do so, but I think everyone's waiting for real concrete steps on the ground.
Thank you very much. My follow-up question is for Stephanie. I know that the survivors spoke a little bit about what the release of these records mean to them. I'm hoping that you can provide some information on how the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation will be using the documents and ensuring that they are available for families and survivors. And from your work, what kind of a difference do you feel that these documents will make to survivors, their families, and communities?
What we're hoping to learn from these records is how the system was administered and run through the narratives and all the associated records. These records are going to provide a more complete context and understanding of the residential school experience, whether it's finding unmarked graves or gathering records of what took place. It helps us honor and remember all the children who never made it home. The MCTR has actively been working on finding further missing children with a full comprehensive review of all of our records, millions of records, to locate these little ones that never returned. There's a lot of truth to still be uncovered. So when we receive this additional record set, communities like Kamloops will be able to have information and access to information. We're working with communities actively right across the nation in completing community portals, memorandums of agreements with them as well. It's a long process. It's taken some time because when the little children were found, we received hundreds upon hundreds of requests for access to records from survivors and communities, and we're actively working through that. And again, in the hopes of, being able to appropriately staff up, we'll get those hands into the records of survivors. We don't have a timeline to share today. It takes time and care. We're sensitive to the fact that we need to protect privacy and information for survivors that may be harmful. These records are going to be accessioned when they come into the NCTR. They're going to be processed for preservation. They're going to be made available through proactive release and added to the archival records in the NCTR website at nctr.ca. But absolutely 100%, we're going to be prioritized to survivors having access to their records and their requests.
Okay, we have time hopefully for 2 more people to ask questions. Please keep your questions and answers brief as we're running short on time.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, la prochaine question est de Boris Pro de Le Devoir. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. À vous la parole.
Bonjour, M. Miller. Il y a déjà un processus qui existe au Canada, le processus de demande d'accès à l'information. J'imagine que la plupart, sinon tous ces documents-là ont déjà été demandés sous une forme et une autre. Moi-même, j'ai fait des demandes d'accès à l'information. J'aimerais savoir si votre ministère a été incapable de répondre aux demandes d'accès à l'information dans les délais requis. Pourquoi aujourd'hui votre annonce va changer les choses?
Boris, oui, il y a un processus d'accès à l'information. Il y a un triage qui se fait. Puis vous pouvez dire que c'est bien là, mais il y a un triage thématique qui est très différent du processus de transfert de documents qui se ferait à une tierce partie comme le Centre national de la vérité et de la réconciliation. Ce sont des documents qui ont été transmis dans le contexte de la Commission de la vérité et réconciliation. Ce seraient des documents selon le cours normal de l'analyse du processus d'accès à l'information que vous n'auriez peut-être bien pas droit. Mais dans ce cas-ci, ça, c'est un transfert encore sujet à la confidentialité, mais à une tierce partie qui est en meilleure position que le Canada, qui a contribué aux sévices qui ont subi ces survivants et qui sont encore, qui font encore des séquelles auprès de plusieurs autres, d'autres générations. Donc, je pense qu'il y a, et vous conviendrez avec moi, qu'il y a une différence conceptuelle entre le processus normal d'accès à l'information et un processus où le Canada a cumulé des centaines de mille de documents et il le transfère à une tierce partie pour en faire l'analyse, la préservation et la relation avec les survivants. Souvent, ils vont se sentir bien plus confortables à avoir une relation avec le Centre qu'avec le Canada. Donc, différence conceptuelle, thématique entre les deux. Donc, ce que ça change aujourd'hui, c'est d'avoir un processus systématique où le Canada, qui a en partie causé cette réalité avec les Églises, transfère le total de l'information qu'elle a en sa possession qu'elle doit transférer au Centre, quitte à en faire un tri plus objectif, quoi, que le ferait le Canada en circonstances normales. Donc, il y a toute une différence selon moi. Et évidemment, le document qu'on signe aujourd'hui, c'est une façon d'assurer cette relation renouvelée de transfert d'informations. Dans beaucoup de cas, des documents qui ont été corrompus. On parle de 800 000 documents au total, plus les 11 récits scolaires qui ont été retenus suite à des obligations de tierces parties envers des institutions catholiques qu'on transfère aujourd'hui. On parle de milliers de documents. Donc, toute une différence. Mais oui, évidemment, dans certains cas, il y a un chevauchement avec le processus normal de l'accès à l'information qui, comme vous l'avez suggéré,
merci. En suivi, vous avez beaucoup mentionné la confidentialité et la protection des données personnelles, ça va, mais vous avez aussi dit des autres considérations légales. Donc, j'aimerais savoir si vous pouvez me donner plus de détails sur les autres considérations légales qui existent.
Bien, les autres considérations légales entrent dans les domaines de privilèges en ce qui a trait à la relation entre la couronne, c'est-à-dire le client, et des documents qui ont été rédigés dans le contexte d'un recours dans les tribunaux, c'est-à-dire des communications soit entre les avocats, soit entre des documents qui ont été dressés dans le contexte de recours collectifs ou autres, ou de recours individuels. Ce sont des documents dont le Canada a le droit de ne pas partager. Il y a des documents qui tombent dans une catégorie de règlement de compte qui sont dans un contexte de litige. Et donc, le Canada, en termes légaux, a le droit exclusif de retenir ces documents. On l'a fait de façon trop large. Et le résultat que ça a, c'est que ça alimente le doute et le soupçon en ce qui a trait à nos relations avec les survivants et leurs familles. Donc, il y a toute une catégorie de concepts juridiques qui, si le Canada les exerce de façon unilatérale, sans trop y réfléchir, fait en sorte qu'on retient des documents qu'on ne devrait pas.
Okay, we have time for one more question, but no follow-up.
Thank you, merci. Dernière question de Anne-Caroline Despanques du Journal de Montréal. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Oui, allô, m'entendez-vous?
On vous entend.
Allô?
Oui, on vous entend.
Allô, m'entendez-vous?
Yes, we hear you. Please ask your question.
Oui, allô? J'aimerais savoir quels sont les 11 établissements concernés par le dévoilement de documents que vous annoncez aujourd'hui.
Vous voulez savoir les écoles spécifiques, on pourra vous fournir la liste par la suite. Ce sont des écoles, grosso modo, règle générale, qui sont à l'ouest du pays, donc Kamloops. Peut-être, Stephanie, I guess, if you have the list, but we have the list internally, we can provide it to the reporter, but the list of the 11 schools, the top of mind one is Kamloops, but there are many other. And they're mostly out west.
Bon, si je peux passer quand même à une autre question, juste pour ne pas perdre celle-là que vous ne pouvez pas répondre. Qu'est-ce qui arrive avec les écoles qui ne sont pas reconnues à l'heure actuelle, donc les écoles de jour ou les établissements où il n'était pas dispensé de classe? Est-ce que vous allez aussi dévoiler des documents?
Ça dépend de l'institution en question. C'est une question qui est très large. Ça dépend il y a des litiges en cours en ce qui a trait aux documents qui sont retenus dans le contexte du règlement de compte avec les écoles dites de jour ou les institutions hospitalières gérées par le Canada. Ce sont des processus qui sont encore réglés par un processus juridique et en temps et lieu, il y aurait question de leur transfert de la documentation en tant que telle, mais c'est encore un enjeu, puis vous l'avez soulevé à venir, mais il y a de la documentation qui entoure ces documents, mais c'est un processus qui sera en cours et qui sera d'actualité sous très peu.
Okay, that ends our time for today's press conference. Thank you much for Minister Miller for agreeing to stay a bit longer, and to our participants joining us virtually. Have a good day.
Miigwech.
Thank you.